the lights being insufficiently bright, or maybe placed too far apart, or maybe poor quality for people who are walking on sidewalks or crossing the street. Next slide, please. Day of the week shows the distribution of the injury collisions that take place involving all the different modes through day of the week. Bicycles and pedestrians across each of the days of the week. Bike collisions are pretty consistent throughout the week, and pedestrian collisions are more likely to occur also during the week. Next slide. This is overall KSIs for all the modes. KSI's peak during the weekend, which is, standard again for people coming up here. Napa Valley has a status of being a regional tourist destination and also a recreation destination. So you can see those peaks on the weekend time periods. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of what is what we're identifying as a high injury network. This is pretty common among Vision Zero plans nationally, is that of all the roadway network, it's typically approximately, it's between 8 and 10% of the roadways where the high injury networks are. And they tend to be freeways, high volume, high speed roadways, or again, curvy rural roadways. That's also quite common. So next slide, please. This shows the jurisdictions up valley. It showing St. Helena, the high injury network in St. Helena is SR 128, Madrona Avenue and Pope Street. Calistoga is showing SR 128 or Foothill Boulevard, Petrified Forest Road, and Washington Street. And for the town of Yountville, SR 29 and Fennell Road. Next slide, please. I'm not sure why that A was dangling on Calistoga. American Canyon, as you might imagine, SR 29. American Canyon Road are the two that are coming up. And in the city of Napa, quite a few, as you imagine, much higher population. Jefferson Street, Soskel, SR 121 or Imola, SR 29, Lincoln Avenue, Trancas, 1st and 3rd Street are coming up as high injury locations. Next slide, please. And this is kind of where we are right now. The project team is working on the development of what we call collision profiles. Back to that context, it really tells a better story about why these collisions are occurring, taking a deeper dive into and identifying what the primary risk factors were that might have been taking place. And then we go forward with the development of a countermeasure toolbox for that. You've probably seen the toolboxes in the bike and pedestrian plan, and this will expand on that to roadways that address vehicles and issues with vehicles. And basically what are called or known as proven countermeasures that come down through federal FHWA. There's been a lot of study and research on these, and there are a number of what are proven type countermeasures that have shown reduction in severe and fatal injuries on the roadways. Next slide, please. And this is a discussion question that we've been posing to our groups. We've taken this through several of the NVTA committees. We've also taken this through our technical advisory working group and our stakeholder group. Is, what are we seeing as the main issues, or what do you see as the main issues? I think certainly speed often rises to number one when we pose this question. And what are the types of conflicts that you see that might prevent us achieving zero? Some feel that this isn't achievable. I can say that there are 2 countries in the world that have achieved this. Back in 2019, both Helsinki and Oslo, 2 cities, have made it to the number 0 over the course of a year. And I haven't checked back to see where they are to date, but that was always good news to hear, is that this is something that is achievable with this paradigm shift in how we view this. Next slide, please. This is what our vision, this is our working vision statement. Napa Valley is committed to an equity-focused, data-driven effort to eliminate traffic deaths and severe injuries on our streets by 2030. We haven't heard any big feedback so far. Everybody seems conducive to accepting this as our vision for this plan, and let you digest that, hopefully. And I do want to say or remind you that we do have 2 members. We would have loved to have all of you on the committee, but that we would have been in a Brown Act violation if I had you participating in our advisory working group. So we have 2 members, Member Joseph and Member Chateau, are both participating in our stakeholder working group. Next slide, please, Laura. And then we move forward with development of our, this is what's kind of involved in development of a Vision Zero action plan. And again, more questions that we need to look towards answering. And, what more can we do to prevent this from happening? And I like to say, and you're hearing a lot about things lately with air and rail, even though, there've been a few incidents, if the same types of numbers were prevalent under those two transportation, they would be shut down. But the roadways don't shut down. We can't shut our roadways down, but we can do a lot to improve the function and the safety out on our roadways. So this is a series of questions that we're going to be walking through and looking to answer through the course of this. Next slide, please. And I think this is my last slide. This is basically a snapshot of the project schedule, where we are to date. We're bringing it to you today for this update. We've been taking this through our committees. We've got stakeholder working groups coming up in April. We'll be looking towards some public workshops. So stay tuned for those coming up in May. And then we hope to have a draft document produced sometime in June or July, shooting for June. And we'll have a stakeholder technical advisory last meeting in June, and then move forward towards adoption late summer, early fall. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
That was an amazing presentation. Thank you. And I'm hopefully we'll get the slide deck after the meeting that'll be sent to the board members. And if possible, Diana, maybe with your notes, since
Sure.
not everything you shared was in the actual slides
Sure.
themselves. I noticed that one of the identifiers, it had other, and I didn't see distractions, like distracted drivers. Is that in the other category?
Boy, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of things that fall under other, and you're talking about the primary collision factors slide.
Yeah.
It could be anything like an animal running into the road. There are a lot of others, and I think it's just they weren't able to determine it, or there are other factors that aren't primary.
Right.
Yeah.
I just feel like distracted driving could be something that could be a campaign for people to be more mindful and pay attention. There's those things like an animal running in front of you. There's nothing you can really do. Okay. Do we have any? Yes, Director Knight.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Meehan, for your report. So this is kind of, I guess, relevant to, in February, you said your project is identifying collision profiles. I noticed in your report on the graph that talked about collision types, speeding, turning, driving in the wrong way. I was curious where driving or ignoring red lights, driving through a red light, what particular profile that falls under.
You mean under the primary collision factor?
Right.
Well, usually that's going to be typically, if there's a collision in an intersection, it's a hit object.
But in terms of going through the light, or which one, is there a particular profile that you have that under? Or,
I don't know that they categorize it that way. It's just like what happens on impact, and that's where how the primary collision factors are designed. Like what occurred that during the course of the collision. And in an intersection, it's typically, if there's a collision in an intersection, it's a hit. You're hitting another vehicle typically, and it's a broadside. Oftentimes when that occurs, which can be much more severe. But I guess I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question.
Distraction or turning. I mean, I just see it just in my commute from
right, and
to my work. Just a fair number of people that are just ignoring red lights and hurrying to work or something, where those are the potentials for these type of collisions and deadly collisions. So
yeah, and I know Napa State priorities to bring back those red light cameras. So hopefully that will be a deterrent. But I think that's a good question in terms of defining what some of these mean.
Okay.
Sure. That would be great to add some definitions in terms of what's under that category.
Okay.
And yes, Director Eisenberg.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I saw those early graphs correctly. It looked like bicycle and pedestrian accidents and incidents are increasing at a greater rate than total incidents.
You are correct. You are correct. Some are calling this a health crisis. Yeah.
And so is that data allowing more emphasis or increased emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian accidents and preventing them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of the reasons that we talk a lot about active transportation. We talk about complete streets. And a complete street really is a street that's designed for all users and all types of mobility, not just vehicles and vehicle safety. And for a long time, we have been designing our streets for around vehicles and vehicle safety. But people use all sorts of modes and people haven't stopped using those modes since we've had our roadways. And so it is something that we are readdressing. Funding is really pointed in that direction. The Safe Streets for All programs, federal funded program. It just went through its first round. The city of Napa actually received a grant under SS4A. And so, yes, it is a significant look at, bikes and pedestrians they are certainly the most vulnerable roadway users.
Right,
They're not
and
protected.
There was
Yeah.
a cycle of, not a bicycle, but a cycle of the safer people feel, the more they ride bicycles and walk, the more they ride bicycles, the safer it is to ride a bicycle. For example, in Amsterdam, where bicycling is very common, it's actually a lot safer. Even though there are more because of the huge numbers. So the more we do, the more it works.
Agree.
Thank you. And Director Doring.
Thank you. I just wanted to get back to the question of the risk factors involved and drilling down a little bit more into that. I also think we don't want to lose sight of the victim of a collision. What comes to mind for me, and maybe it's anecdotal, but folks who are just walking across the street with a cell phone in hand and really not paying attention. Also, maybe I'm sensitive to this because of my law practice, but I've had a few cases involving drunk driving, but the bicyclist, wine tasting or whatever it was. There's a number of factors where it's on the other side, and I don't know where those categories cover those, but I think we should also, I think it's predominantly the driver of the vehicle, but there are a number of other circumstances involved in collisions other than driver caused accidents.
That is correct. And so, the slide that showed all collisions or total collisions, which were the white bars, and the gold being killed or seriously injured. All collisions are inclusive of all types of collisions, not just vehicle to pedestrian or vehicle to bike, vehicle to vehicle. It could be vehicle hits object, could be a bike that crashes into an object. That it's inclusive of all those collision types. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gregory.
Thank you, Chair. So it sounds like having this plan makes us eligible to apply for certain types of funding.
Yes.
But do you think also in the future will funding realign to require Vision Zero related project elements?
Yes.
As we
Yes, regionally speaking, MTC adopt a Vision Zero policy. We will be looking towards all of you to adopt a policy in each of your jurisdictions, going back to you. Some of you have been around long enough that you may remember adopting complete streets policies. Similar to that, we'll be looking for the jurisdictions to adopt Vision Zero policies that are in alignment with what's happening regionally and nationally.
so we'll be more competitive if we start folding that in. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for that question. Yes, Director.
Yes, so to change people's behavior, we have the carrots and we have sticks. And is law enforcement on board with this plan? Are they informed? Are they in the loop? And are they in concord with the goals and ready to enforce them as well?
Well, as we move through the process, we have included them. They are members on our technical advisory working group. We've got fire and police we've got sheriff, CHP, and local police chiefs participating with us on this. And, there are always trade-offs. Where we don't want to trade off is where when humans make mistakes, it results in something severe or fatal. We have to acknowledge that this is human behavior out on our roadways, that humans do make mistakes, but what we're aiming for is how do we reduce the effect of when those mistakes do occur, and how do we create a situation where it's not as severe. And I like to use roundabouts as an example, because there's a great diagram that goes with that. We're talking about intersection collisions. When there's a collision in an intersection, somebody runs a red light, it's a broadside it's a severe collision that can often result in severe injury or fatality. In a roundabout, the number of points in a standard intersection where a collision might occur are 32. There are 32 different points in those intersections. It's cut in half to 16 in a roundabout. So one of the reasons that you're seeing these coming forward is really a safety feature. As people learn to use them and get better at it. And even if a collision does occur on a roundabout, it's not nearly as severe as something that might occur in a standard intersection. So it's across the board with multiple different things. And again, back to that shift to a safe systems approach. That means systems from all different sectors, not just transportation planners. So yes, absolutely. We want law enforcement on board with this because they're the enforcers out there. They're the ones that oftentimes are first on the scene. They're the ones making the determination about the primary collision factor and, additional education on what are the types of countermeasures that work or don't work. We definitely are reliant on them to notify us of what those are.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And more reasons to support Napa Forward. Moving forward. Yes,
Yeah.
Director Shuto.
Thank you. This is hard to talk about it, but I'm going to get through it. I lost a family member to an accident this last weekend. So this is heavy on my heart, and I know how important it is for us to be doing this. And I just sitting here taking all these notes because the statistics match. It was a community that's very similar to ours with tourism, and it just makes it more clear than ever how important it is to move forward on these policies and that there are real people and real families and real heartbreak behind every single one of these deaths. So thank you so much. And I'm definitely going to be moving forward on this for us in St. Helena.
Very sorry for your loss. I do want to say
Thank
that the first thing that we're doing in this plan is dedicating it to anyone, to all of those who have lost their lives or have been severely injured on the roadways in Napa County.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Shuto. Yes, Director Garcia, thank you for your patience.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm looking at areas where data is not realized, I guess. Places that are too dangerous already, like Highway 29 or Donaldson Way crossing Highway 29. People don't use that because it's not safe. I cringed some time ago, saw a woman with a kid in a stroller coming out of Rio Del Mar on the east side of the highway, probably wanting to go to Walmart or something like that. And there's no path on that side of the road. Fortunately, there was a police officer in the car behind her, basically escorting her through to where she could get off the highway. But if places are really dangerous, then we don't have any, people don't use them. So we don't know. The fear factor is what keeps that number very low.
That's correct. Yes.
So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. The sooner we can actualize this plan in terms of how we make those improvements, it'll work better. I've certainly, Director Eisenberg, I spent some time in the Netherlands myself many years ago. It's very bicycle oriented. Roamers, there's what they call little mopeds that are also on there, but there's a lot of them are very separated from it. And you can have lanes as wide as this room, it's all bicycles. But if we want to be more involved in active transportation, then it behooves us to consider the impact and start where we can make the most impact first on it. We have a new commission in American Canyon Open Space, Active Transportation and Sustainability. So these are certainly issues that we'll be charging that committee to look at as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. I think everybody's had a chance to provide comments. Diana, once again, thank you very much. This is an informational item.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're moving on to 10.4, which is a federal and state legislative update by Executive Director Miller.
Thank you very much. So on the federal side, the Biden administration on Tuesday outlined the next step in its plan to deploy 500,000 in new electric vehicle charging stations. And they will be begin accepting applications for $2.5 billion in grants to run public charging sites. The Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, funded through 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law, is part of a $7.5 billion federal money geared at building out a national network of public EV charges. So stay tuned for that. We'll make sure to get that out to the jurisdictions when it's officially announced. Solicitations are also out from federal legislators for community project funding and congressionally directed spending grants. NVTA has submitted a letter of support for a $7 million request to several legislators in the North Bay, including Congressman Thompson, for the pre-construction phases of the Tolday Creek Bridge on State Route 37. NVTA staff are also working with St. Helena staff on the St. Helena Downtown Sidewalk Project. And we'll submit a letter once we get information from them if an application is actually being submitted. And in addition, the County of Napa and the City of American Canyon, I just heard today, are contemplating a grant application for the Newell South Kelly connection and State Route 29 flood mitigation project. I don't know the details of that, but we've called Steve Letter and he's going to get back to us on that. On the state side, the LAO has issued a report specific to the governor's budget to cut $4 billion in transportation funds. That's the proposal. The LAO urges the legislature to consider directing the California State Transportation Agency and Caltrans to delay one-time funding awards instead. In addition, the LAO recommends the legislature reject the governor's trigger restoration proposal that provides funds for transportation projects should new revenues be identified. The LAO is pessimistic that those revenues will materialize. And so they think the trigger should be removed from the governor's budget proposal. There are several bills on the matrix for the board action today, and do you want me to take them one by one? Do you want me to just do the whole thing? And
One by one is great.
Okay. The first one is Assembly Bill 16, Dixon, who would authorize the governor to suspend the annual adjustment to the tax rate on fuel. This is an adjustment that was established as part of SB1, and it could potentially affect the amount of revenues that go to the state highway account and the road maintenance and rehabilitation account. The SB1 funds that flow to Caltrans and local jurisdictions for maintenance. It doesn't look like this bill will move forward, so staff is just recommending that the board take a watch position on this bill. Do you want to take them all at once at the end?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's
AB 463 WIX would give priority power during shutdowns to transit agencies in addition to other priority organizations. It takes under consideration that California transit systems are transitioning to electric vehicles and need to provide power to draw power from the grid for fuel. This bill is sponsored by the California Transit Association, and staff recommends that the board take a support position on this bill. AB 540 WIX would make changes to the Social Services Transportation Improvement Act and impose a $10 vehicle registration fee, which would be distributed to counties. And this is the critical part based on population and could be dispensed with a majority vote of the local board of supervisors to either the local transit agency or other agency, providing it is used exclusively for senior and disabled populations. So staff is recommending the board take an opposed position unless amended for the simple reason that the number of cars and the distribution of formula and Napa County voters would be Napa County voters would end up subsidizing other counties if this moves forward. AB 610, Assemblyman Holden is reintroducing the free youth pass on transit program. In concept, staff recommends subsidizing youth passes, but the bill does not lay out how this would be funded. And it's not sustainable for a transit system to fully fund free fares. Therefore, staff is recommending the board take a support position if amended to include revenue sources outside public transit agencies' existing fund sources. AB 1377, Friedman, the bill would add to the existing Interagency Council on Homelessness, a position representing California's transit agencies. Existing law requires the governor to establish the Interagency Council on Homelessness. This council's charged with identifying resources, benefits, and services that can be used to prevent and end homelessness in California. Transit agencies, including the Vine system, is having to expend a lot of funding to address the growing homelessness in our community. And so staff is recommending the board take a support position on this bill. Assembly Member Agar Curry has reintroduced Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1 that would reduce the voter threshold to pass a sales tax to 55% for affordable housing and transportation related measures. As in previous iterations of the bill, it does not include sales tax measures that would fund transit operations. And staff is recommending that the board take a support position on this bill. SB 5 new N, existing law requires the state to annually adjust the tax rate on fuel-based taxes on consumer price index, on the consumer price index, which was added under the Senate Bill 1 legislation. These funds flow to the state highway account and the road maintenance and rehabilitation account and are used to maintain highways, local streets, and roads. This bill would cap the adjustment at 2%. Staff is recommending the board take an opposed position on this bill, given the most recent inflation rates and associated construction costs to maintain transportation infrastructure. SB 670, Allen would just note that this bill is not a spot bill, but additional changes are expected. This requires that Caltrans and local agencies create a single model for vehicles miles traveled. Most local agencies in urban areas already have models, as do most regional transportation agencies. And so it's unclear whether the bill would involve development and maintenance costs of the model and what the model criteria would be, and how it, would be required to be altered. And so there's a lot of unknowns about this. And so staff is recommending the board just take a watch position at this point. And that concludes, oops. Yep, one more, sorry, SB 769 Gonzalez. It would require if a local agency provides any type of compensation or expense reimbursement to members of its legislative body to provide the members of the legislative body with at least 2 hours of fiscal and financial training once every 2 years. Staff is recommending the board take a watch position on that bill.
Thank you very much, Executive Director. Any questions? Yes, Director Doring.
So back on the youth transit pass proposed legislation, AB 610, I'm not understanding the reason for the opposition compared to what's in the chart itself. It says AB 610 would create a pilot program that would only take effect if funds are appropriated in the budget. And so maybe I'm just misunderstanding what you're saying
Well,
in terms of the source of monies.
So previous iterations just never identified the funding. And I just, this is a support if amended. It's not an oppose. That's what staff's recommendation to the board is.
Okay. But
To identify.
it wouldn't really go forward without it being budgeted, the money's appropriated in the state budget, correct?
That's true.
Okay.
I just want to make sure they identify it.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any other directors? Questions or comments? This is an action item, so is there any public comment? Not seeing any. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the recommended staff?
I'll make a motion that we approve the positions recommended on I think it's 9 different items.
Gregory, second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Vice Chair Joseph and a second by Garcia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
I'm going to do a nay because of 610, but other than that, I'm supportive of all the rest.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Doring. Thank you. We're on to future agenda items. Do we have any items anyone would like to bring onto a future agenda?
I do, Chair Alessia.
Yes.
I've been bringing this up for a while, but the EV charging stations, I think there's a lack of infrastructure in our community. And I brought this up at the county. I drive an electric car and I'm challenged to find a charging station, pretty often. But it's a hard issue to do because every municipality is doing their own thing. Director Miller, I don't know if this is the right body, but to be the hub, the coordination of it, we have a long ways to go if we really want to encourage and incentivize people to change the vehicles they drive and go towards more of an EV charging station. Our systems, I can tell you, just going downtown, they're always full.
So I appreciate you bringing that up. It's been unclear to me as well as, I think at one point, Jerry Hansen, when she was working on her own as a consultant, started working on that. And then the last thing I heard was that the ball had been passed to the Climate Action Committee. But, we're happy to take that on if you think it is more appropriately. We don't have a plan. You're right.
The Climate Action Committee did do an inventory, but it's more of an inventory. I think I'm thinking about action in terms of where the funding is, where the gaps are, and maybe even incentives that we could pursue to help, encourage this, but it's where the system is not adequately.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think we could take that on and maybe work with jurisdictions to help fund a consultant to do that work.
I'm done venting, but I
Yeah,
am charging
okay.
at the station.
I think, I do believe that there's going to be, as the Climate Action Committee reviews our priorities set in 2022 with 7 new members on a 12-member committee, that's going to be coming up for that committee to review to make sure those priorities are still set. And my understanding is that an EV plan, a regional countywide EV plan is on the forefront. So maybe what we can do is that we can, if you don't mind, Kate, is reach out to the county, to the CEO and his staff member who now are the administrative not authority, but the administrators of CAC, because I know they're working with the city of Napa and some other jurisdictions, but it will go back to CAC soon.
Thank you, Chair Leslie, and I appreciate that. I know being with the county that the staffing and the resources being allocated are probably not enough to move as quickly. And I really don't care who does it. I just care about getting it done. And if it's the Climate Action Committee, if it's us, I think we should focus on outcomes. So that's all I would say. That doesn't bother me who does it. I just know that we need to do better. So
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
If
Yes,
I can
Vice Chair.
add to that, I think there is some merit. Frankly, I think the CAC is going to focus on a regional action plan, which means it's going to focus kind of at the 30,000 foot level. I think a lot of individual jurisdictions just don't seem to be as motivated to do the work. So we may be the best body under the circumstances to come up with minimum standards, something that we could develop as a model template that each jurisdiction then adopts as part of their zoning ordinance or whatever. So I would agree with Director Pedrosa. Somebody needs to do it. And right now I'm inclined to think NVTA, even though Director Miller may argue and say, I've got enough on my plate, but somewhere along the line, we need to figure out how we can pull this off. It may be as easy as going out and cut and pasting enough templates somewhere that we can just design our own little model template. But I do think this is something that needs to get done sooner rather than later. And maybe I'm too cynical, but I think everybody else is going to be pushing off, relying on somebody else to do it. So maybe we are the one.
Yeah, I appreciate that because we do have a lot of faith in our director and our staff being able to
Yeah, see.
return and do something. I mean, this is what you get for
They're all
being so
hiding
good
back there.
at what you do. So I do hear that. I just want to again
I
be
would
sure that
just-
we're not going to be
yeah.
redundant. We don't have
You
to,
Yeah, federal grant funds will certainly incentivize the private sector to
And-
want to put charging stations in their parking lots. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
and there are grant funds towards an EV plan. So I know that the city of Napa staff is looking at that too, and will be assisting CAC with the CEO in the interim. But very good points. Yes, Director Gregory.
Not really a future agenda item. I expressed interest at our January meeting of understanding as a board member how the Saskell Junction project will be phased as it evolves, especially once we start going vertical. I was sent the phasing plans and sort of dug in myself to get a sense. I just feel like I should know because people ask. Maybe I think we get a quarterly report from staff. Maybe as part of next month's report from staff, they can kind of walk through that phasing. So I think it's all good for all us to understand how the thing's going to evolve as it shifts in the next year and a half.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Yes, and Director Garcia.
Thank you. I was speaking to Director Pedrosa's point there. Yeah, it's sooner than later is better. We're going to meet our objective for no more gasoline powered cars in 2030 if we don't have charging stations. That's a setback for anybody who's even considering buying an electric car. What do I do with how do I get a charge? It's that infrastructure stuff. It's not just the vehicle. I think probably maybe it's being new to the Climate Action Committee, maybe because something could be investigated there. But I think maybe a template works. But we also need to collect the information. How many charging stations do we already have? Who's putting them in? How do we have that conversation about encouraging people to get there? the point on funding for it. Yeah, this
Mhm.
need to be pushing more on funding for these types of infrastructure pieces. Our capacity, what's the grid capacity? Not known to me. I don't know if that's a good discussion.
Well, you're a new
today.
member of CAC, so
Yes.
you get to learn these things. So there is a report
Yeah.
of an assessment made on the EV stations in the county, and we can forward that on
Good.
to our director here and to all the members. So the members of this board can see that too.
That would be helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes,
Thank
Director
you.
Chateau.
I'll just be really brief. We are very motivated in our city in Santa Elena to be working on this. I was just on the phone with our city manager today, and we are resource constricted, staff restricted. So anything that we could do to work together would be so encouraging and positive. Thank you. I also know that we're more competitive with the grants when we work together. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, great comments and a couple things to add to the future agenda. Very good. If there's nothing other, then we can adjourn this meeting at 2:52. I have to look closely. My clock is close. At 2:52, this meeting is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is Wednesday, April 19th here at 1:30.